As usual, if you like these stories or it felt meaningful to you, feel free to like, share, and comment your thoughts below, as well as subscribe to our channel. It could be a huge support for our work. Now, let's just enjoy the stories.
Blood dripping onto imported Italian marble is usually a guaranteed death sentence in the Falcone household. But when a nameless catering maid took a diamond-studded backhand meant for the most feared matriarch in New York, she didn't just prevent an insult, she ignited a devastating, multi-million-dollar war of absolute vengeance. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Falcone estate on Long Island was thick with the scent of white lilies and unspoken threats. To the untrained eye, it was merely the 60th birthday gala for Caterina Falcone, a philanthropist and high society widow. But to anyone who knew the subterranean pulse of New York's underworld, this was a summit. Caterina was the iron spine of the Falcone syndicate, holding the family empire together until her son fully consolidated his power. Chloe Hastings was not part of this world. She was merely a 22-year-old girl in a starched black and white uniform, employed by Beaumont Elite Catering to carry trays of Dom Perignon through a sea of dangerous people. Chloe kept her eyes down, just as her manager had instructed. See nothing, hear nothing, and above all, do not spill anything. Mr. Beaumont had hissed at the staff before the doors opened. Chloe needed this double shift. Her mother's mounting bills at the Brookhaven Care Facility were a relentless weight, and the extra overtime pay was the only thing standing between them and eviction. She moved gracefully through the crowd, navigating the silk gowns and bespoke tuxedos. As she approached the opulent sweetheart table at the front of the room, she noticed the atmospheric pressure drop. Caterina Falcone stood near her seat, a regal woman with silver hair swept into a pristine twist, draped in midnight blue velvet. Opposite her stood Victoria Kensington. Victoria was the wife of Arthur Kensington, a billionaire hedge fund manager who handled the laundering for the Falcones' bitter rivals, the Costa family. Victoria was notorious for her volatile temper, fueled by endless flutes of champagne and a deeply ingrained, arrogant belief in her own untouchability. "You think you can freeze my husband out of the Southport development, Caterina?" Victoria hissed, her voice vibrating with a shrill, reckless edge that cut through the low hum of the string quartet. Caterina's expression remained as placid as a frozen lake. "Victoria, darling," she said, her voice smooth but laced with venom, "this is a birthday celebration, not a board meeting." And Arthur froze himself out when he decided to start skimming percentages. He should be grateful he is only losing a contract. Chloe was frozen 3 feet away, a tray of crystal glasses trembling slightly in her hands. She knew she should turn and walk away, but the sheer gravity of the confrontation anchored her to the spot. The surrounding guests had subtly stepped back, creating a wide, tense circle around the two women. "You arrogant old bitch," Victoria spat, her face flushing an ugly mottled red. "You and your bastard son are going to lose everything." Caterina didn't flinch. She offered a small, pitying smile. "Security will show you to your car, Victoria. You are embarrassing yourself." The dismissal snapped the last fragile thread of Victoria's self-control. With a shrieking gasp, Victoria lunged forward. She raised her right hand high, a massive, sharp-cut emerald ring flashing on her middle finger. The strike was aimed directly at Caterina's face, intended to humiliate the untouchable matriarch in front of the city's elite. Chloe didn't think. It wasn't a calculated move of bravery, nor a desire to play the hero. It was pure, raw instinct, a reflex born from years of jumping between her abusive, alcoholic stepfather and her younger sister. Dropping her tray, Chloe lunged. The heavy silver platter hit the marble floor with a deafening crash, crystal glasses shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces, but the sound was immediately eclipsed by a sickening crack. Chloe threw herself directly into the path of Victoria's swinging arm. The blow caught Chloe squarely across the left side of her face. The heavy emerald ring tore through her cheek just below her eye, the sheer force of the impact spinning her around. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her knees driving hard into the shards of broken champagne flutes. Silence, heavy and absolute, crashed down on the ballroom. The string quartet screeched to a halt. Chloe gasped, clutching her face. Warm blood immediately poured through her fingers, dripping down her chin and staining the crisp white collar of her catering uniform. Her vision swam, the left side of her face throbbing with a sudden, blinding agony. Caterina Falcone stood perfectly still, her dark eyes wide with rare shock as she looked down at the bleeding girl at her feet. Then, the matriarch's gaze slowly lifted, locking onto Victoria Kensington. The pity in Caterina's eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying, abyssal coldness. "You," a male voice echoed from the grand entryway. It was low, barely above a conversational volume, yet it seemed to vibrate the crystal chandeliers above. The crowd parted instantly, practically shrinking against the walls. David Falcone strode into the room. He was a man who commanded the room, not by demanding attention, but by absorbing it. Dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit, David possessed the lethal grace of a predator. He was 30 years old, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of a bruised sky. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second. His mother standing rigid, Victoria trembling with her hand still half raised, and a bleeding maid kneeling in a pool of blood and shattered glass. David didn't look at Victoria. He walked straight to his mother. "Are you touched?" he asked quietly. "No, David," Caterina replied, her voice steady. She pointed a manicured finger downward. "This girl." She stepped in front of me. David finally looked down. Chloe was shaking violently, trying to push herself up, but a piece of glass had pierced her knee. She hissed in pain, sinking back down. David crouched beside her. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. He smelled of cedar and expensive tobacco. Without asking, he reached out and gently gripped her wrist, pulling her hand away from her face to inspect the wound. The laceration was deep, the skin torn open by the jewelry, bleeding profusely. "What is your name?" David asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle, against the backdrop of his terrifying reputation. "Chloe," she stammered, terrified that she had ruined the event, terrified of the man holding her. "Chloe Hastings. I'm sorry about the glasses. I'm so sorry." David's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He pulled a pristine, silk pocket square from his suit and pressed it firmly against her bleeding cheek. "Hold this here, Chloe Hastings," he instructed. He stood up, rising to his full height. He finally turned his gaze to Victoria Kensington, who was now backing away, all the color drained from her face. "David, Victoria stammered, her arrogance completely evaporating into stark terror. "She provoked me. Caterina insulted my husband." David raised a single finger, and Victoria's voice clamped shut as if she had been strangled. "You brought violence into my mother's home," David said, his voice a chilling monotone. "You raised your hand to the woman who gave me life, and you spilled the blood of an innocent girl under my roof." He snapped his fingers. 3 men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the room, moving with military precision. "Take Mrs. Kensington to the basement," David ordered softly. "Wait for my arrival." Victoria began to scream, thrashing wildly as the guards grabbed her arms, but her cries were muffled as they dragged her out through a side door. Not a single guest spoke, not a single person moved to help her. David looked back down at Chloe. "Get Dr. Harrison up to the private suite immediately," he ordered a nearby lieutenant. He then stooped down, sliding one arm beneath Chloe's knees and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly from the floor. I can walk," Chloe protested weakly, her head spinning. "Quiet, Piccola," David murmured, his eyes fixed firmly on the staircase ahead. "You've bled enough for my family today." The private suite in the east wing of the estate felt less like a bedroom and more like an upscale medical facility disguised as a luxury penthouse. Chloe sat on the edge of a velvet chaise lounge, wincing as Dr. Harrison, a discreet, gray-haired physician who made a fortune keeping the underworld's secrets, finished stitching the gash on her cheek. 7 stitches, Dr. Harrison murmured, cutting the surgical thread. "You are very lucky, Miss Hastings. A 1/4 of an inch higher, and that ring would have ruptured your eye. As it is, there will be a scar, but I will prescribe a topical compound to minimize it." I've also bandaged the laceration on your knee. Thank you, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. She felt entirely out of place in her blood-stained catering uniform amidst the Renaissance paintings and silk drapery. The heavy oak door swung open, and David Falcone entered. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white dress shirt rolled up at the forearms. He carried an air of dark, suppressed energy. Is she stable, Arthur? David asked the doctor, though his eyes never left Chloe's face. She is, Mr. Falcone. She needs rest, antibiotics, and painkillers. I'll leave the prescriptions on the nightstand. The doctor packed his black leather bag with practiced speed and bowed out of the room, pulling the door shut behind him. The silence that settled between Chloe and David was thick and heavy. Chloe kept her eyes on her scuffed black work shoes, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew the stories about David Falcone. The media painted him as a ruthless businessman. The whispers in the city's kitchens and back alleys painted him as a monster who dismantled his enemies with systematic cruelty. Look at me, Chloe, David commanded softly. She swallowed hard and lifted her chin. The right side of his face was shadowed, but she could see the intense, calculating way he studied her. Why did you do it? He asked. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. You make what, $20 an hour pouring champagne? My mother's life, her face, is not your responsibility. Why throw yourself in front of a madwoman? Chloe shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. I wasn't thinking about money or who she was. I just saw someone about to get hit, and I moved. It was a reflex. David's eyes narrowed slightly, searching her face for deceit. Finding none, a strange, dark respect flickered in his gaze. A reflex, he repeated, almost to himself. In my world, loyalty like that is bought with blood and millions of dollars. You gave it away for free. He pulled a chair over and sat across from her, his knees almost brushing hers. My family lives by a very strict code, Chloe Hastings. An eye for an eye, a life for a life, a debt for a debt. You bled to save my mother's dignity, perhaps even her life, considering the precarious state of her health lately. The Falcone family is now in your debt, and I pay my debts. Chloe shook her head quickly, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. No, really, Mr. Falcone, it's fine, I don't want anything. I just want to go home. It is not fine, David stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Tomorrow, my men will go to Beaumont Catering. They will inform your manager that you have been permanently retained by the Falcone family. Your mother's outstanding balance at the Brookhaven Care Facility, paid in full. As of 20 minutes ago. Chloe's breath hitched. She stared at him, stunned. How did you know about my mother? I know everything about everyone who steps foot in my house, David said smoothly. A background check was run on you the moment the catering company sent the staff list. I know your mother requires specialized neurological care. I know you dropped out of NYU to pay for it. I know your father is a coward who ran off to Nevada to avoid his gambling debts. Chloe felt exposed, stripped bare by the cold efficiency of his power. Tears pricked her eyes, a mixture of overwhelming relief and deep-seated fear. You didn't have to do that. I do what is necessary, David replied. He reached out, his warm, calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from her uninjured cheek. The touch was terrifyingly intimate. You will stay here in the guest wing until you are fully healed. You will want for nothing. He stood up, heading toward the door. What about her? Chloe blurted out before she could stop herself. The woman who hit me, Mrs. Kensington. David paused with his hand on the brass doorknob. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. When he looked back over his shoulder, the gentleman who had just paid her mother's medical bills was gone, replaced by the apex predator of the New York syndicate. Victoria Kensington made a fatal error tonight, David said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. She thought she was untouchable. She forgot that all wealth, all power is an illusion if the ground beneath your feet can be pulled away. He didn't tell Chloe what had happened in the basement. He didn't tell her that Victoria had spent the last hour sobbing on her knees on a concrete floor, surrounded by armed men, as David methodically outlined exactly how he was going to destroy her life. "The physical pain you felt tonight is temporary, Chloe," David continued. "But the pain I am going to inflict upon the Kensington family will be generational. Arthur Kensington's hedge fund will collapse by Tuesday. The SEC will receive anonymous, irrefutable evidence of his offshore laundering by Wednesday. Their accounts will be frozen, their assets seized. By the end of the month, Victoria Kensington won't have the money to buy a cup of coffee, let alone a diamond ring." Chloe shivered, the sheer magnitude of his revenge washing over her. She had taken a slap. He was going to erase an entire family from existence. "Rest now, Chloe," David commanded softly. "The war has already started, but you are safe behind my walls." He stepped out, the heavy door clicking shut, leaving Chloe alone in the opulent silence, bound by a terrifying new reality. She had bled for the Mafia boss's mother, and in doing so, she had unwittingly become the catalyst for the most spectacular downfall high society had ever seen. And worse, as she touched the bandages on her cheek, she realized her life was now inextricably chained to the darkest, most dangerous man in the city. By 9 a.m. on Tuesday, the financial district of Manhattan was humming with its usual chaotic energy. But on the 42nd floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, the atmosphere inside Kensington Global Management was one of absolute panic. Dozens of agents from the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission, armed with federal warrants from the Southern District of New York, flooded the trading floor. Arthur Kensington, a man who usually commanded boardrooms in his bespoke Tom Ford suits, was pinned against his mahogany desk, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The feds were tearing into the servers, seizing hard drives that contained a decade's worth of laundered money belonging to the Costa family. David Falcone had not exaggerated. The anonymous dossier delivered to the SEC was a masterpiece of financial ruin, complete with routing numbers, offshore Cayman accounts, and recorded phone calls. Arthur's empire evaporated in less than 45 minutes. Miles away on the Upper East Side, Victoria Kensington was blissfully unaware of her husband's arrest. She was sitting in the VIP lounge of Bergdorf Goodman, attempting to soothe her bruised ego with a private viewing of Cartier's new winter collection. Her face was pale, the memory of David's cold, terrifying threats in the basement still haunting her, but she desperately clung to the illusion of her wealth. She handed the saleswoman her black American Express Centurion card to purchase a $60,000 diamond tennis bracelet. 5 minutes later, the manager returned, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Kensington," the manager whispered, handing the card back as if it were toxic. "The card has been declined. In fact, the bank issued a seizure code. We have been instructed to confiscate it." Victoria stood up, outraged. "Do you know who my husband is? Run it again." Before the manager could reply, Victoria's phone buzzed violently. It was a text from her country club president. "Victoria, please do not come to the gala tonight. Your membership has been indefinitely suspended." Then came an alert from her banking app, all accounts frozen by federal mandate. The blood drained from her face. She stumbled out onto Fifth Avenue, the reality of David Falcone's promise crashing down upon her. She wasn't just broke, she was socially executed. While the Kensington's world burned to ash, Chloe Hastings was living in a gilded cage. Her days at the Falcone estate in Long Island blurred into a surreal routine of luxury and quiet isolation. Her cheek was healing beautifully under Dr. Harrison's daily care, the stitches removed to leave a thin, pale pink line that barely detracted from her natural beauty. Her catering uniform had been burned. In its place, her closets were filled with cashmere sweaters from Loro Piana, silk loungewear, and tailored wool trousers. Caterina Falcone became a frequent visitor to the guest wing. The formidable matriarch would arrive with a silver tea service, dismissing the guards to sit with the girl who had taken a blow meant for her. "You do not understand the weight of what you did, Chloe," Caterina said one afternoon, sipping Earl Grey. "In our world, weakness is blood in the water. If Victoria had struck me in front of those families, the Costas would have perceived it as a crack in the Falcone armor. They would have moved on our territories the next day. You didn't just save my cheek. You saved dozens of lives." Chloe looked down at her hands. "I still feel like I don't belong here, Mrs. Falcone. David, Mr. Falcone." He paid off my mother's facility for the next 5 years. I can't accept that. You already have. A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. David leaned against the door frame, shedding his suit jacket. The dark circles under his eyes hinted at the ruthless hours he had spent dismantling Arthur Kensington's life, but his gaze softened the moment it landed on Chloe. Katerina smiled knowingly, stood up, and quietly excused herself from the room. David walked over and sat on the edge of the chaise lounge, invading Chloe's personal space with the intoxicating scent of cedar and expensive cologne. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the healing scar on her cheekbone. Arthur Kensington is currently in federal holding, facing 30 years for racketeering and wire fraud, David stated calmly, as if discussing the weather. The bank foreclosed on their penthouse this morning. Victoria is currently sleeping on a cot in her sister's basement in Queens. The debt is settled, Chloe. Chloe shivered, overwhelmed by the casual destruction he wielded. So, I can go back to my apartment? David's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening to a stormy, impenetrable gray. His thumb stopped moving on her cheek, his hand cupping the side of her face instead. No. No, she breathed, her heart kicking against her ribs. Your apartment in the Bronx is unsecure. And you are no longer an anonymous maid, Piccola. You are the woman who stood under the Falcone banner. The Costas are reeling from the loss of their money man, and they are looking for someone to blame. If you walk out those gates, Lorenzo Costa will have you snatched off the street before nightfall to use as leverage against me. David leaned closer, his forehead almost resting against hers. You are mine to protect now, and I do not lose what is mine. The twist came on a torrential Friday night, 2 weeks later. Chloe was in the estate's vast library, curled up in a leather armchair reading, when her cell phone buzzed. It was an unrecognized number. She hesitated, then answered. Chloe Hastings? A woman's frantic voice asked. This is Nurse Davis from the Brookhaven Care Facility. It's your mother. She's had a severe seizure. We are transporting her to Mount Sinai Hospital right now. You need to come. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Chloe's chest. Mount Sinai? Is she stable? I'll be right there. She hung up, sprinting out of the library. The estate was strangely quiet. David was in the city handling a shipping dispute, and the guards in the main hall were stationed by the outer doors. Chloe didn't stop to explain. She grabbed a heavy trench coat, bypassed the main security desk by slipping through the kitchen's service exit, and ran out into the pouring rain toward the front gates. She knew the security code to the pedestrian gate. She had watched the staff use it. She punched in the numbers, the iron gate clicking open. She stepped out onto the slick, dark road, pulling her phone out to call an Uber. Headlights suddenly blinded her. A black SUV screeched to a halt inches from her legs. Before Chloe could react, the side door slid open. 2 massive men in dark raincoats jumped out, grabbing her arms. She screamed, thrashing wildly, but one of the men clamped a heavy, gloved hand over her mouth, dragging her toward the vehicle. Nice and easy, little bird, a cruel, familiar voice sneered from the front seat. It was Lorenzo Costa. Beside him, trembling like a wet rat, was Victoria Kensington. I did what you asked, Lorenzo. Victoria sobbed hysterically from the passenger seat. I got the burner phone. I made the fake call. She came out. Now give me the money to get my husband out of jail. Lorenzo laughed harshly. Money? You stupid bitch. You're the one who started this war. He pressed a gun to Victoria's temple. Get out of the car. Victoria screamed, but Lorenzo kicked the passenger door open and shoved her out into the mud. The men dragged Chloe into the back seat, pulling zip ties around her wrists. Her heart hammered in her throat. The call about her mother had been a lie, a desperate ploy orchestrated by a ruined woman trying to buy back her life from a monster. Let's go, drive, Lorenzo barked. The SUV's engine roared, but it didn't move forward. Suddenly, the night erupted. High-beam spotlights flooded the road from all directions, turning the dark street into a blinding arena. 3 armored tactical vehicles slammed into the intersection, blocking the SUV's path. From the woods behind them, a dozen men in black tactical gear emerged, assault rifles leveled at the Costa vehicle. Lorenzo swore violently, reaching for his weapon, but the driver's side window instantly shattered. A suppressed gunshot hissed through the rain, and the driver slumped over the steering wheel, dead. The rear doors were ripped open with terrifying force. The men holding Chloe were violently yanked out into the mud and rain, met with the brutal, sickening sounds of breaking bones. Someone reached in and grabbed Lorenzo by the collar of his expensive suit, dragging him out into the storm. Chloe gasped for air, shrinking back against the leather seats. Through the open door, illuminated by the harsh white spotlights, stood David Falcone. He didn't wear a raincoat. The torrential downpour soaked his white shirt, molding it to his chest. He looked like a god of vengeance, his face an expressionless mask of pure, concentrated wrath. David looked down at Lorenzo Costa, who was kneeling in the mud, surrounded by armed Falcone enforcers. "You touched my property, Lorenzo," David said, his voice cutting through the roar of the rain. "You brought a rat to my gates." "She's just a maid, David," Lorenzo spat, wiping blood from his mouth. "You ruined my entire financial network over a catering girl." David drew a silver Kimber 1911 from his shoulder holster. "She is the woman who bleeds for my family, which makes her untouchable." He didn't hesitate. David pulled the trigger. Lorenzo Costa collapsed into the mud, lifeless. Victoria Kensington, who had been crawling toward the tree line, shrieked in absolute terror. She scrambled to her knees, clapping her hands together in prayer as David slowly turned his gaze toward her. "Please," Victoria wailed, her designer clothes ruined, her face smeared with mud and mascara. "Please, David, I lost everything. My husband, my home, my friends. I have nothing left. I only made the call because they promised me money." David stared at her with the cold indifference one reserves for an insect. "You were warned, Victoria. You struck at my mother. You lured my woman into a trap. There is no money left to save you. There is only the gutter." He looked at his men. "Leave her here in the mud with the Costas. Let the police find her with the bodies." David turned away, holstering his weapon. He walked to the SUV, his terrifying demeanor vanishing the second he looked inside at Chloe. He pulled a knife from his belt and quickly sliced the zip ties from her wrists. "David," she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck, burying her face into his wet chest. The metallic smell of blood and gunpowder was masked by his familiar scent. He wrapped his strong arms around her, lifting her out of the vehicle and burying his face in her hair. "I've got you, Piccola. I've got you. I knew the moment the call came through. The facility's line is monitored by my men. I let them draw you out just enough to end the Costa threat forever." He carried her back through the iron gates, the heavy metal slamming shut behind them, locking the violence and the ruined remnants of their enemies on the outside. Months later, the Long Island estate hosted another gala. This time, there was no Victoria Kensington. There were no Costa spies, and Chloe Hastings was no longer wearing a black and white catering uniform. She stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, draped in a breathtaking, custom-made emerald silk gown. The faint, pale scar on her left cheek was visible, worn not as a mark of servitude, but as a badge of unparalleled loyalty. The ballroom of dangerous men and wealthy elites fell entirely silent as she descended, bowing their heads in deep, unwavering respect. David Falcone waited for her at the bottom of the stairs, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. She wasn't just a maid who took a slap. She was the catalyst of a war, the survivor of the fallout, and the undisputed queen of the Falcone syndicate. What began as a selfless reflex on cold Italian marble rewrote the hierarchy of New York's underworld. Chloe Hastings sacrificed her safety to protect a queen, and in return, David Falcone burned a dynasty to the ground to avenge her. She entered the Falcone estate as a nameless maid, but through blood, unwavering loyalty, and an unbelievable revenge, she remained by his side as their untouchable new sovereign.